WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'm not wearing the hat because I just did my hair. And Luke will appreciate this going into Cincinnati weekend. Luke, you know me to love mentors, right? Like whether it's, drinking with Marvin Lewis a couple of weeks ago or Brian Billick's involvement or Don Moeller's involvement in Baltimore Positive. I love mentors, and I love people that are smarter than me and trying to find them and seek them out and get some kernel of wisdom. But my first grade teacher is coming on the show after this, so I'm trying to get like a little bit scrubbed up. Did I do all right? I tried to do my hair like it was in 1974.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know what the fashion was then per se, as far as what first graders wore to school, but you should try to go with that.
No. It's much more. I have a shirt that fits me now. That's the same shirt I wore in first grade. And I'm going to pull that out from Miss Jonda. So you'll want to check that out. She's not Miss Jonda anymore. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I'm going to let her do it because I don't want to mess it up. But the story is, this is why you want to listen to this, okay? Don Moeller has been my friend for 38 years. He was my guidance counselor, teacher, mentor, friend, football friend, tailgate friend, family friend, all of that. My wife was sick, the whole deal. So Don decides to do this thing with me, and about 4 months ago, we were in like maybe May or June, he texted me, "Did you have a teacher named Miss Jonda?" What did you teach? You taught fifth grade, didn't you?
Fifth grade, yeah.
Okay.
Student taught fourth grade and then taught fifth grade for 5 years.
Okay. So in Pennsylvania where, hold on, everyone should vote. Vote if you're in Pennsylvania. Vote. Please vote. Thank you. That's my public service announcement. I'll be giving those all month here and at WNST.net. So he said, "Do you know Miss Jonda?" And I'm like, yeah, she's my first grade teacher. Yeah, I knew her well. I gave her a hard time. She probably wasn't a big fan of mine. And he said, "Well, she's in my den right now. She's a part of Linda's book club and has been for 40 years. And I'm like, how is that possible? And that's Baltimore, right? So when we're bringing Baltimore together during Bengals week, I just wanted to say why I'm not wearing a hat and why I had to do my hair now that we have a camera here for my first grade teacher who I'm trying to impress and let her know that I turned out okay. That she did a good job.
Very cool.
Well, my kindergarten teacher was hospitalized briefly last week. I think she's going to be okay. So I wanted to have her first. I have found my fifth grade teacher. I'm still looking for my second grade teacher who I really, really, really want to find the most. No offense to any of the other teachers. My art teacher from high school, my science teacher from high school, various middle school teachers. I've lost a lot of teachers, like my favorite guidance counselor, not named Don Moeller, was a beautiful woman named Evelyn Stopak, and I Googled her the other day, and I found that she passed in 2001. And when I was really in a transition point in my life, she took me out and played tennis with me in the 8th grade at Holabird when, my father was trying to steal me and take me to Venezuela, just little stories like that. So she was like really a cool person, and I wanted to see if she would have been in her 90s, So I'm tracking down teachers this week, and I'm tracking down wisdom, which is why I come to you for the wisdom of the Baltimore Ravens. So, but you were a teacher, so, like somewhere along life's highway, later in your life, even later than now, one of your students is going to track you down. It's going to mean a lot to you. So anyway, it means a lot to me.
Yeah, I've caught up with students. I'm Facebook friends with probably a handful of my students. That's something that, certainly you avoided while you were in the profession. But
are they in college now? What are they?
Oh, all of my students, my last year teaching was 2011. So you do the math. They're all out of high school and in college, or I know one of my students I'm Facebook friends with, she just got married not too long ago.
Well, you can never run into them into a bar because you can't go to bars.
See, that's what was always strange, though, when you're in the profession and, you keep a low profile. If me and some other teachers would go out to a happy hour, generally we'd go somewhere outside the school district, but inevitably you'd have a time where you'd run into a parent of a student. Now I've hit the age, and my former students have hit the age where I run into them on occasion on that non-pandemic time.
We never, ever ran into our teachers at the mall.
It's always
at
awkward,
the movies.
Right?
Well, I think all of our teachers live somewhere else. And these are the kinds of things when you're I turn 52 next week. I have not talked to Miss Jonda since 1978. You know what I mean? So I don't even really know what she looks like other than the picture on Facebook. And she's Don's wife's inner circle best friend. It's bizarre. And so
but the perception was always that teachers they lived in their classroom, right? I mean,
Right. They
they
got in
just
their
had
little
a closet.
car and they went to the clouds. They went to the teacher cloud.
No,
Or
no.
they slept in the room where they had the vending machines.
I was going to say they slept in their classroom and they opened up the closet and one of those electronic beds would just slide down,
Like
right?
a Murphy bed. Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Exactly. So that's what I always thought. So it was always strange seeing your teachers
I'm
outside of
nervous to
school.
talk to Miss John. I admitted that on the air because I really, like, of all the teachers I had, I think I gave her the hardest time. Like, I was really, I read at a 7th grade level in kindergarten. So I don't know what that would mean to you as a teacher in 5th grade, that if you had somebody reading in a college level in 5th grade, they wouldn't really be all that interested in the Island of the Blue Dolphins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me, like, Curious George was not like a challenge because I read. I mean, I just read. That's why I'm a writer, all that stuff, I guess. So I had to go to the 2nd grade class for reading in 1st grade. So I left my classmates, and I did that again in the 2nd grade. And then once I got to 3rd grade, they're like, just stay in 4th. Just hang out there with Shonda and the rest of them. You'll figure it out, you know. So that's why I graduated. I graduated from high school at 16. So I was, like, young. But when I was really young, like 6, and reading like a 12-year-old, it shouting out the answers. I mean, you can only imagine what a pain in the ass I was at 6. I mean, literally, right? Like, you studied this. You went to school for this, you know? So I was like a little Rain Man-y, a little weird when I was a kid. So, yeah, and I sat up really straight in the front, and I answered all the questions. And, you know, my dad was a straight shooter. So my dad had a lot of flashcards, Luke. I mean, that's why I really love the offense of Chip a couple of years ago, you know, holding up the big bird and stuff like that. That's what my dad did to teach me math. Luke Jones is here. We're learning math, and we're learning about elementary school at Colgate, and we're going to learn about the Ravens this week. Ravens news this week. There was, I guess on Wednesday we get together for all of this. I just want to make sure. The first question is everybody COVID negative, right? I mean, as Dick Cass would say, think positive, test negative.
Yeah, I mean, with obviously that being the big story around the NFL, and it's been the big story throughout. It's just it's not in the forefront when you have testing going well and teams are playing, and throughout the summer we talked about training camp, but we said over and over and over the challenge would be once the regular season started, from a travel standpoint, from a standpoint of these guys aren't tied to the facility quite as extensively as they are during training camp, so they have a little more free time on their hands,
which clearly was a little bit of a problem in Tennessee last week, right?
Yeah, and I mean, with whether you're following protocols in the building, I mean these are we've talked about it. I mean, you can set up all the protocols you want, and we've seen baseball now get to the division series. Clearly they had issues. It didn't go perfectly. I don't think anyone should anticipate it going perfectly if you're in a non-bubble kind of setting. But they made it through. There were some headaches and some touch and go moments along the way with the Marlins and the Cardinals, et cetera. But now that we're into the regular season with the NFL, we talked about it. It's going to come down to the individuals. It's going to come down to, some good fortune in some cases, because, as we've talked about over and over and over, just because you do everything right as an individual doesn't mean that you can't still test positive at some point. And that still applies to NFL players, coaches, staff. So you have that. And then if you have some guys who aren't doing things the right way, or there's some kind of hole in the protocols that we've said there might be something that comes up that people didn't think about. Who knows? And then you hear some of the reporting from Wednesday where the Titans had an off-site workout, and I don't know.
Just doing stupid stuff.
Well, I mean,
not following the rules.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to.
We got a president of the United States getting hospitalized who hasn't worn a mask. I mean, like, you either wear the mask and do the thing 6 feet away, or you do not. And when you break the protocol, they have wristbands, right? I mean,
right.
We've talked about these wristbands. We've talked about the big brother nature of what is 6 feet. Harbaugh's talked about it, in all these Zoom meetings, and they have evidence that they didn't do the right thing. So now Roger Goodell had the videotapes of the monkeys in the trees with Belichick, right? Like, clearly a lot of people believe Dick Cass and the Ravens had the punch in the elevator long before TMZ had it, right? So there's all of these things, right. That go into this. But then what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to punish the whole organization. You're going to throw them out of the league. You're going to dock them 4 games. You're going to let them play. You're not going to – you can't encourage anybody else to do it. So, I mean, it goes back to the same question we had with Ray Rice and every other. Who's the judge and who's the jury in the league, and what happens when you break the rules? What happens? Because this is just, I don't know, the Titans thing. After what the Marlins set as the example for what not to do, and then they wind up having a blossoming season, right? I mean, for the Titans to not listen and for it to be sort of institutionally in on it. We learn what teams and gangs are all about, right? We've seen the Astros, right? Like when everybody's in on it, shh, don't tell anybody, the love boat. I mean, that's the way teams work.
Sure. But I'd also say this. I still think there's very much an element of the unknown that goes into this. One person slips up and you potentially have an outbreak. And look, to this point, the Ravens have done really well with it. Is that to say that if one player got infected, that they wouldn't have some issues within the building and potentially an outbreak? I don't know. I think certainly some discipline is warranted. There's no question about that. I'm not so sure I'm on board with the idea of giving the Buffalo Bills a free win. I don't think that works from a competitive balance standpoint when you ask the rest of the AFC East or the rest of the AFC.
I think if your whole team's been cheating during a plague and not following the rules and you piss 30 and then still break the rules, I have no problem. Bills win. Stay off the plane.
Okay,
there you
so
go, Tennessee.
So you want the
I mean, I don't know what to say.
Bills,
if you're not ready to play because of the plague and it wasn't like your kid brought it home, it's because you're
cool with
Willy Wonka with the gobstopper, dude. You know what I mean? Like literally.
But I don't understand from a competitive balance standpoint. You play a 16-game season. You can't just give a team a free win. You just can't. I mean, that's then why are we doing this? So you're cool with if the Bills are the number 2 seed and the Ravens are the number 3 seed?
I knew we were going to have this argument in August. I don't even know what the hell to say.
Look,
I knew when they started the season this was going to happen. And I knew when it happened, you'd have a point of view. I'd have a point of view. Goodell would have. Everybody's got a point of view. That they should have pointed this out in the beginning. If you cheat, you will forfeit a game. And we're all going to agree to that, right? Right? All of us are going to agree. We're going to wash our hands and we're going to put a mask on, unlike these con men down in D.C. Poisoning the well, right?
I disagree with that being the discipline. I totally disagree with that being the point of discipline, though. Because you're talking about a 16-game season. Baseball having a 16-game.
What is the discipline? Fine him $1 million?
Can I finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I finish?
Sure.
Because there's other ways to do this. There's heavy fines. There's loss of draft pick. Here's something the league should have done rather than saying the team's going to forfeit. Because, again, you're talking about a 16-game season. Baseball that had a 60-game season did not have teams forfeit. You're talking about giving a team.
No, they played 7-inning games and started with a guy on second base.
Yeah,
they might as well have played
adjusted.
pitcher's hand out for crying out loud.
Okay, they adjusted. But my point is you have to anticipate this, and baseball adjusted. Now, should they have thought of having some more open dates in the schedule to allow for makeup games? Sure. And my point is the NFL, when they released the schedule back in May, at that point in time, they should have thought at that point in time, we need to have some cover here. If we're not going to put teams in a bubble, we need to have some cover here that goes beyond just hoping that a bye week will work out where you can rearrange the Ravens and the Steelers schedule with Tennessee and make up a football game.
Or really believing that a room full of 22-year-old NFL players were going to keep, their pants up and their hands clean and girls away and buddies away and hanger-ons and all.
Planning for 100%.
Thinking that wasn't going. That was what I thought, and that's what every football player I talked to in August thought. They thought, yeah, I was 24 once, and I had money once, and I had girls once, and I had bling once, and there's just no way they're going to keep – you're asking them to keep human beings away. That, I mean, you might be able to keep the weed away. You might be able to keep, drinking and driving. You might be able to keep some of that stuff away. Keeping away all of it from all of these guys was they were going to break the rules. They were. You knew that. Now, what's the penalty? Now we're going to make up the penalty, which is what the league always does, right? It's what they do the next time a guy punches his girlfriend. You're a star. You get to play. You stink. You go away. You're kind of in the in-between, and we got money sunk into you, so go away for 6 weeks and get some, go get some training, and we'll come back, and we'll try to square it all up and give you your spot back at defensive end in Dallas. Because I've seen all of this, right? What happens when the whole team during a plague cheats, lies, covers, cheats, and then says, whoa, we're not going to forfeit the game. That would be against the spirit of the rules.
Or if the bus driver that takes him to the stadium has coronavirus and they test positive for that reason. We're looking at
but
this.
But they can find that out from the wristbands,
Understood.
Right? Yeah.
But my point is the league planned this poorly, not from even a standpoint of, oh, these guys are terrible and they're going to be irresponsible and everything, which, yeah, there's going to be some of that. But because to your point, they are in their early 20s and we are human beings that need contact and interaction by nature. Everything about this year is against human nature. My point is you don't just say a team's going to forfeit because then you're giving teams free wins. Would you like the Steelers to just have a free win and that hinders the Ravens' impact to win the AFC North? Here's what you do. Yes, you have punishments. You fine, you discipline. If you find individuals that were egregiously breaking protocols, you suspend them, but you still play the game. And here's how you do it. You plan for an open week in the middle of your season, akin to the All-Star break in Major League Baseball, that gives everyone a week off for that week. That gives you an open time there to make up any games that are canceled in the first half of the season. And guess what? If you don't have any, it's a nice nod to player safety for players that we've been talking about for years. And maybe it's not lip service for once. You have an open week at the end of the season then for the second half of the season if you have to cancel a game and you make that up. And again, if you have an extra week built in there, then great. Players get to rest and the league can pat themselves in the back from that standpoint. Here's what I would do from that individual game standpoint. No, I don't say the Tennessee Titans forfeit because, again, you're talking about a 16-game schedule and the competitive balance and the integrity of the competition goes out the window when you're essentially giving a team a free win when you only play 16 games. What I do, however, is every player for the Titans that is on the COVID-19 restricted list right now is ineligible to play in that game. So then, yeah, they are going to be dipping into their practice squad and using lesser players. And that's where the punishment comes in for the Titans beyond just fines and discipline and stripping of draft picks and doing everything you feel necessary. And believe me, those should be very heavy penalties. I agree with you 100% when you make up the game. And
if you're missing 20 guys, it's a sham game now. Now, that being said,
but
the Marlins brought guys in from the California Penal League
still play,
and beat the Orioles.
And that's my point. You cannot just – because then it just becomes, well, we're just handing out free wins to teams. You know, I mean, think about this. We always talk about the football schedule compared to the baseball schedule. You know, giving a team a free win in the NFL is akin to giving a team 10 wins in baseball.
I don't think it's free. I think if you have 22 guys that get themselves infected,
it's totally
then
free.
Shame on you. Don't get on the plane.
Because you're totally looking at it from the standpoint of the Titans deserve a loss. I'm saying the Bills don't deserve a win for that.
I am looking at it from the standpoint of in August, if you weren't going to – and by the way, you get my vote for commissioner, Luke. Through all this acrimony you and I are having, you're not wrong. You're right. They could have put a bye week the first week of November, thrown a bye week in, said we're moving the Super Bowl to the first week of March. We're just going to move the game back 4 weeks. We're going to give ourselves some oxygen, and we're going to allow our players some space here because a percentage of them are going to catch it. It's a plague. Not with this goof running the country. It's a plague. It's not that no one's going to catch it. Some people are going to catch it. Now, what's going to happen when we catch it? Are we going to wristband and all get together and go fudge practices? No. If you do that, you're going to forfeit the game. And that's how I would have handled it in August because I don't like rule breakers. You know what I mean? I don't.
But you're still leaving it up to the randomness.
For being a
of the
bleeding
schedule,
heart
though.
liberal, I am really, really punitive with people who break the rules. I mean, Moeller and I get after this all the time, but for everything from the death penalty down, that like I am all for harsh punishment, especially when
I'm not for randomly rewarding another team, though. I mean, would you like the Kansas City Chiefs to get the #1 seed because a team they played had to forfeit and they finish a game ahead of the Ravens?
I'm just good fortune. Well, what difference is it if they're going to come in with 22 players that aren't NFL players?
Because you still have to play the game.
Is that?
Because you still have to play the game.
All right, so you want a Brigham Young Navy game? Yeah,
but it's no different than and from my standpoint, when those players test positive, I treat that from a competitive standpoint as though they're injured and they're not playing that week. So yeah, they have to play with practice squad players, and if they can figure out a way to win, then fine. But I'm not just giving a team.
Mike Vrabel's a genius.
When you're talking about a 16-game schedule, one out of 16 is a significant portion of the season, and I'm not okay with just giving a team a win because what do you say to the
You're giving me the integrity speech now. I mean, if that were the case, they would have wiped that whole seasons with the Patriots. You know what I mean? Literally.
Well, and they didn't, and that's kind of my point, though,
The
because
Astros beat on trash cans, and
but
they
you
still
still
have
want
rings.
but you still want to play the games. You still
Well,
got to
this
play
is
the
what
game.
happens when you fudge along with the cheaters. You let the cheaters cheat, and this is what Luke is here. We haven't talked about the game. I mean, I've been in Cincinnati all week. I did Lapham and Horde show. You can find that out in the audio vault as well. And they have a better quarterback, right? And than they've had, and for that, I remember when Andy Dalton came in here and did twirls. Same thing with Carson Palmer 20 years ago, and beat us. So for that, I need to see the Ravens go out and have a representative effort this week because I think that other quarterback's not going to quit.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe Burrow, you look at what he's been able to do, and look, he hasn't been phenomenal, but for a rookie without a preseason, for a rookie with an offensive line that is quite shaky, he's been impressive. And look, we shouldn't be that surprised. Anyone who watched this kid do what he did at LSU last year, just an absolutely historical, crazy, incredible season for the Tigers. I mean, I'm not shocked to see him have 3 straight 300-yard games. Now, is the downfield passing game clicking for them to the point where he'd like it to be? No, of course not. They haven't gotten A.J. Green going just yet. Tyler Boyd's looks really good. The Ravens are very familiar with him. Rookie T. Higgins, maybe that's the new Dalton to A.J. Green. It's going to be Burrow to T. Higgins in the future with more success. Who knows? But I'll say this, for all of the praise that Baker Mayfield got at the end of 2018, where he was playing pretty good football. And if you remember, the Browns, took the Ravens down to the wire in Week 17 with the division on the line for Baltimore. He's looking like that same kind of guy where it's like, this is looking pretty good. He's looking like he can play and looks like he's getting better. And I'll say this: I mean, the Ravens are clearly favored. They're favored by a lot, as they should be. You're talking about a team that was the best in the NFL in the regular season last year compared to the team that was the worst in the regular season. But this is the kind of game where I think you're right. The Ravens need to come out and play well. If they sleepwalk, I mean, this is a team that has enough talent that can really give them some issues. But there's still a team that has one win for a reason. And if you've watched them play, whether it's the defense, whether it's the offensive line not protecting Burrow particularly well, they're a team that still has some very clear weaknesses. And that's where, to your point, and I don't know if a representative effort's the best way to describe it. I mean, the Ravens had a representative effort in Washington, and people weren't exactly impressed with that. And as I even said, their performance wouldn't have beaten Kansas City, for example.
Well, I loved your point about, like, you didn't expect them to be more impressive this year, did you? I mean, you want them to win by more than 51-3 or 45-6. I mean, they're not going to win like that they're going to win 1 or 2 that way. And maybe they'll win that way this week if they pick this kid off 3 times and shake him up. But the shaking him up part usually involves my wife in the upper deck screaming at him. And a quiet stadium for Joe Burrow is probably a really nice golf course for him.
Yeah, compared to 71,000, there's no question about that. I think that's
going into Alabama or anywhere else he ever went into.
I think that's an interesting point, especially for a young quarterback. I mean, I think that applies to anyone. I mean,
that'll quiet his mind. That'll make him better quicker.
We've seen Aaron Rodgers use hard counts on the road. We've seen Patrick Mahomes use hard counts on the road. I mean, this is a different dynamic for sure, but for a young quarterback especially. But, it's interesting because you just mentioned, this expectation about what the Ravens would look like this year. And look, they made the bed that they're sleeping in now by laying an absolute egg against Kansas City. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. That was the game, the one game this year that you could look to when the schedule came out in May, where the Ravens could point to that as saying, if we win that game, that's really a feather in our cap. It shows we've graduated and progressed from last season. We've finally broken through. And not only did they lose, they lost handily. So what happens?
And it looked like they would lose handily again if they played next week, right? Like,
sure. And that's part
of the issue is how that they've regressed. And we talked about this the morning after. They're not going to be able to recover from that. The only thing they can do is look worse if they lay a turd against any of these teams.
Right, and that's kind of where, as I wrote at WNST.net and Baltimore Positive, it's kind of that long, thankless road to January at this point, because just about every game, and maybe throw the 2 Pittsburgh games in there as the exception if the Steelers are going to continue to win games and be right there with the Ravens in the AFC North. But Kansas City was kind of the one eyeball test game, right? It was the one game that really felt like it meant something because we've talked about this. They went 14-2 last year. They led the NFL in scoring. They set a single season all-time record in rushing. Lamar Jackson set all these records and won MVP. They had 13 guys make the Pro Bowl. Been there, done that. And I'm not saying that that's not incredibly impressive, but how are you going to exceed that? How are you going to match that, let alone try to exceed that? And that's kind of where the Ravens find themselves at this point. It's interesting hearing some of the questions for John Harbaugh on Wednesday. This is meant as no criticism to our local media, but it kind of had a negative tone to it. And you do look at the numbers and you see the Ravens are 31st in passing offense. They're averaging 180.8 passing yards per game. Total yardage, they're 25th. 18th in third down percentage. They're 21st in red zone. They're scuffling a little bit, but at the same time, I do look at some of those numbers and I look at where they relate to last year, and you kind of look at where they were through the first month of the season last year, and you remind yourself that they were a work in progress through 4 weeks last year. And this is why people that wanted to try to not brush it off, but move on from the playoff loss as much as possible, you heard what? Well, they were ahead of schedule this year, and they're bringing their whole team back, and they're going to add Calais Campbell and Derek Wolfe, and they draft J.K. Dobbins, and they add Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison. I mean, they're going to be better than they were last year. But we know it doesn't always work that way. And we know that, and John Harbaugh said this on Wednesday, you don't just pick up where you left off last year. And that's what the Ravens are finding out right now. Now, I've written this. We've talked about this over and over and over. When you look at how the Ravens profiled last year, especially on offense, they were absolutely setting up for some pretty substantial regression to the mean. Lamar Jackson threw a touchdown on 9% of his pass attempts last year. 9%. Tom Brady's never done that in his entire career. Pat Mahomes was at 5.4% last year. Russell Wilson was at 6% last year. When you're at 9%, I mean, that you're talking about an incredible, absolutely extraordinary level of efficiency. And you just don't duplicate that every year. And that's not to say Lamar Jackson's having this terrible regression or anything like that. His yards per attempt is slightly up. His completion percentage is slightly up. But to throw 9% of your pass attempts to be touchdowns, that does not happen every year. And that's what happened last year. For the Ravens to score at the level they scored last year, that doesn't happen every year. I've used this example over and over, and I will continue to use this example. The Kansas City Chiefs, defending Super Bowl champions, right? That's what I understand. They scored 20 fewer offensive touchdowns last year than they did in 2018. 20 fewer offensive touchdowns they scored last year compared to 2018. Well, they still went 12-4. They ended up winning the Super Bowl, so they got a step, 2 steps further than they did the year before when they lost to New England in the conference championship. My point is, the Ravens probably were never going to be on pace to match what they did last year, let alone exceed it. So this is where they find themselves. And I've used this analogy. I've thought about this. I kind of equate the Ravens offense to that young pitcher that throws 100 miles per hour and just completely tears the league up his first time going through the league. And that analogy doesn't feel as special anymore because so many guys throw 100 miles per hour in baseball, but you get my point. You have someone who's relied on a deadly fastball to be wildly successful. Now, as we're a second full season into this offensive revolution, what do we see? Not that teams have solved the Ravens, because they're still averaging over 30 points per game. They're still scoring a lot. It's not as though their offense doesn't work anymore. But more teams are more familiar, and they've put together best practices, if you will, to not let Lamar Jackson run for over 100 yards, not let the Ravens run for 250 yards against you, not let the Ravens be so incredibly efficient passing the ball. So what do the Ravens have to do in turn? They have to adjust. And what have we talked about over and over and over? We've talked about this need for the Ravens to be able to throw the ball when they're behind, right? Well, here's the problem. You only play Kansas City once a year.
You don't fall behind much.
And most of the teams in this league cannot handle what they do. So it's almost like and by no means, I'm not saying the Ravens are minor league here, but it's almost like the minor league pitcher that has that 100-mile-per-hour fastball, and he's at AAA. Guess what? He can use that 100-mile-per-hour fastball and just blow through the league and have lots of success and put up shiny numbers. But what's going to happen? You get to a higher level or you get to better competition, they're going to have more answers for that. So you need to work on some of your secondary stuff. Keegan Aiken was a great example of this at AAA Norfolk last year. He put up an ERA, well, I want to say it was close to, in the high fours. What was the reason why? He was working on his secondary stuff and working on some off speed and doing some things that was out of his comfort zone. So my point is not that the Ravens are messing around in these games. They're still doing, they're winning the games. They've won, their 3 wins have all been by double digits. So it's not as though they are messing around to the point where they're almost getting beat against these teams. But we keep saying we want to see the Ravens be able to play better off schedule and play from behind. You've got to work on that at some point. But the problem is, when they are throwing the ball and it's not as efficient or Lamar Jackson's missing on some downfield throws, what's everyone saying? Why are they getting away from the run? So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't proposition for them right now. And look, that's not to say that they don't need to get better. I've written about that. I've been critical. I was very critical of what happened to them against Kansas City. And they certainly need to get better. But my point is, if they're going to evolve, it's not just a light switch that you flip. You've got to work on that some. So are they taking some opportunities in some of these games where, could they just go out and run it and run it and run it and win the game and you move on and you check off Cincinnati or you check off Washington and move on to the next opponent? Sure. Are you really learning anything about yourself as a football team if you're using that same formula that, by the way, works against virtually the entire league? The problem is it's not necessarily going to work against the toughest competition, and we've seen that. That's played out. We've seen it with 3 losses to Kansas City. We've seen it with a loss to Tennessee in January. So is there an element to the Ravens trying to evolve a little bit and throw the ball a little bit more, and Lamar Jackson trying to become a little more proficient, whether it's down the field or outside the numbers? Yeah, I think there's some of that going on. And that's where I think we need to have a level head about this when looking at this football team right now. Have they been as good as last year? No. Did I expect them to be as good as last year statistically? No. You can go back and look at my 10 predictions at the beginning of the season. Number 1 was I think the Ravens are going to score at least 10 fewer touchdowns than they did a year ago. Why? Because of looking at statistical regression and the incredible efficiency they had last year. It's just, you're not going to have that.
Even the Redskins got some film on them and had a front 4 that stopped them a couple of times. And they didn't kick the ball around enough to lead to a track meet. It becomes a track meet when there's 2 turnovers and 2 stops, right?
Sure.
Ravens score twice, take the ball away twice. Now it's 21-0 or 20. That's when the track meet begins. But, having the Ravens have to earn 3 or 4 drives in the first half and stop 2 or 3, and having a 21-10 lead, that leads to the garden variety win we saw last week. And I don't think that's ever going to be as impressive as, going up top to Hollywood Brown in Miami last year and the party that it began, right?
Well, how many times did Ted Williams hit 400 in his career?
Once.
The Ravens hit 406 last year. When you're trying to figure out what they're going to do the next year, you don't expect them to hit 420 or 430. There's going to be some regression.
You think if they hit 383, they'd be as good as Rod Carew was in 77, is what you're saying?
I'm not saying they won't be hitting 383
or 390, as good as George Brett was in 1980.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But my point is, when you do something historic like they did last year, I mean, I've talked about this. They had the best point differential the NFL has seen since the 2007 Patriots, who went undefeated and regular season-wise, we're the greatest team in NFL history, probably. 72 Dolphins. Look at the schedule. I mean, different eras. I get that, but they did it. They went 16-0. The Ravens had the best point differential since the 07 Patriots. That's just not going to happen every year, and that's not to say that they won't even win. It's not to say they won't win the Super Bowl. That's not to say they won't have the best record in the league. But this is why I said all along, because they went 14-2 last year, I can actually by them being better from a talent level at certain spots, but that doesn't mean I'm going to predict them going 15-1 or 16-0, because there's so much week-to-week variance. Weird things happen, injuries, weird matchups, scheduling quirks, which kind of takes on a different context this year. There's just so much that can happen
Yeah, the Steelers are pissed.
that the Ravens can be 12-4 and they're 2 games worse, but they could win the Super Bowl and it not be a fluke or anything like that. It's a different season, and it's not to say that they were even lucky last year, although from an injury standpoint, health standpoint, they were pretty darn lucky, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But now you look at it, and I mentioned the regression. No Marshall Yanda now, and Ronnie Stanley was missing in week 4, and you have a rookie at right guard, and
They threw Earl Thomas out.
Hayden Hurst isn't in the picture anymore, and so their tight end, their multiple tight end game isn't quite as dynamic as it was. So variables change, and I'm not excusing the Ravens. I've said they need to get better. They have to be better.
And I think the Bengals will be better this week than what they were last year.
Sure. But at the same time, you can only play who you're presented. And that's where I go back to this whole point that we've talked about. And you and I talked about it a lot in Miami Super Bowl week about the Ravens being able to come back, being able to play, quote, off schedule. That's the term that I've used over and over and over. Well, when you're playing lesser teams, short of spotting them 10 points at the beginning of the game, it's kind of tough to be off schedule. So you either just use your tried and true formula that works against, 27, 28 teams in the NFL, but not all 31. Or, not saying you abandon that, but you do mix in some other elements to try to evolve as an offense. So you do throw the ball a little bit more. You have Lamar Jackson do some different things. And, they need to get better from a run game standpoint too, by the way. I mean, I'm not saying they've been efficient there. It hasn't just been about running more. They need to be a little more efficient and productive there. So again, this isn't to say that everything is 100% fine. It's to say, let's remember this is a moving target here. And to Harbaugh's point, Ravens go 14-2. They had a heartbreaking loss against Tennessee. You don't just pick up where you left off. It's a different season, different set of players, different schedule, different injury situations, all that. So they're navigating that, and it doesn't look as great as it needs to look, but it's week 4 or week 5 now. So let's see how that plays out, and let's see how they look against Pittsburgh. Let's see how they look against Indianapolis, who has played some really good defense to this point in the season, even if their schedule hasn't exactly been tough. They'll go to New England, another team that plays good defense. So they're going to get some tests to kind of see where this offense is. And look, they're still going to be a run-first team. I'm not saying you deviate from that, but we've said over and over and over, they got to figure out ways to be able to come back when they fall behind 2 scores. Well, you've got to practice that a little bit. And, I'm not saying that these are preseason games, but when you're playing lesser teams, you do have an opportunity to, 1, win the game, of course, but 2, figure some things out in the same way that, you see some young players playing late in some of these games when they're up by 3 or 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's figuring something, that's working on some things there and giving some other guys some reps. So, you try to find that sweet spot between making sure you're doing what you need to do to win, but you want to grow. And, when you're playing teams that are going to be picking in the top 5 or the top 10, you're not going to be able to just create a scenario where you're down by 10 points unless you turn the ball over 3 times, to your point. So I think there's some push there for them to evolve a little bit. And guess what? When you're trying to evolve, it's not going to just be a light switch and it's perfect. You need to work on it. So I think John Harbaugh and Greg Roman would not say that publicly, because it would come across as a knock on that week's opponent. But yeah, I think there's some of that going on, and some of that they're trying to work on to better prepare to play Kansas City or Tennessee or Pittsburgh potentially. I mean, so I think some understanding of the big picture needs to be in order, even if there's still a lot of disappointment about what happened against Kansas City 2 weeks ago.
They are still talking about the breaking of the ankles last year in Cincinnati, and they spent their whole offseason retooling to make sure that Lamar doesn't do that to them again this week. I know I will not have indigestion. There'll be no chili involved. Luke's going to get a boxed lunch, and I'm probably going to go to Pizza John's on Sunday and just bring back something that's going to make Luke want to stop by and get leftovers on the way out of here. So football on Sunday, a little later in the afternoon. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. You can find Luke at Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. We're merging the streams for the all-new Baltimore Positive that is now launched. You want to go to BaltimorePositive.com, and by the weekend, WNST.net will be pointing there, and we will all be one big, happy orange and purple family, just like they are in the parking lot. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Taos in Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore Ravens football and Baltimore positive.